Ross Chastain just said something that has the entire NASCAR world stopping in its tracks. Two-faced. That's the word he used. Not frustrated, not difficult, two-faced. And when you hear exactly who he said it about and what led up to that moment, you're going to understand why this story is way bigger than just two drivers having a bad weekend together. Welcome back. What we're digging into today is one of those situations that starts on the racetrack but doesn't end there. Because what happened between Ross Chastain and Daniel Suárez didn't stay buried in the post-race garage. It spilled out, and the way Chastain described it, with that kind of raw, unfiltered language, tells you that whatever went down between these two ran a lot deeper than a simple racing incident. There's history here. There's frustration that clearly built up over time. And there's a confrontation that apparently revealed something about Suárez's character that Chastain felt the world needed to know. If you're new here, subscribe before we go any further. We cover NASCAR the way it deserves to be covered. Not just the results, but the real stories happening behind the pit wall. Drop a like too if you want more content like this. So let's set the scene properly. Ross Chastain is not a driver who minces words. Never has been. This is a guy who came up through the ranks the hard way, who earned his spot in the Cup Series by being relentlessly aggressive and refusing to back down. That watermelon farmer energy is real. When Chastain feels wronged, he doesn't quietly stew about it. He says exactly what he thinks. So when a word like two-faced comes out of his mouth in a post-race setting, you have to take it seriously. That's not heat-of-the-moment venting. That's a specific, deliberate accusation. And this is where it gets interesting. The incident itself happened on track, which is where most NASCAR beef starts. Chastain and Suárez ended up tangled together in a moment that cost one of them significantly in terms of track position and points, depending on where you're sitting in the standings. A moment like that doesn't just sting. It can reshape your entire race day and ripple into the weeks ahead. For Chastain, who has been fighting hard to stay relevant in the playoff conversation all season, giving up positions he shouldn't have given up is not something he brushes off easily. But here's the thing. The on-track incident alone wouldn't have generated this kind of reaction from Chastain. Drivers race hard. Contact happens. Most of the time, even when guys are frustrated after a race, they keep it at a certain level. What pushed this into different territory was apparently what happened in the conversation that followed, because Chastain has made it clear through his own words and through the way he carried himself after the race that Suárez said one thing to his face and did another on the track. And in the tight-knit world of NASCAR, where trust between competitors matters more than most people realize, that kind of thing cuts deep. But that's not the full story, because Suárez has his own perspective on this, and it's worth understanding before we take one side completely. Daniel Suárez is a driver who has worked incredibly hard to build his career in American racing as someone who came over from Mexico and had to prove himself in a culture and a sport that wasn't always welcoming. He's earned respect. He's had genuine moments of brilliance on track, and the people who know him well would push back hard against the characterization Chastain threw at him. So we have two credible drivers, both with legitimate gripes, telling very different stories about the same situation. And that tension is exactly what makes this so compelling. Some fans are firmly in Chastain's corner on this one. They point to his history of being straight-talking and consistent, arguing that when Ross says something happened a certain way, it usually did. Others are defending Suárez, saying that Chastain has a well-documented history of making moves on track that other drivers find borderline, and that maybe the frustration being directed at Suárez is a little bit convenient when Chastain himself isn't exactly shy about aggressive racing. And honestly, both of those takes have merit. This isn't a clean-cut case of one guy being right and one guy being right and one guy being wrong. And it gets even more interesting when you consider the broader dynamic between Trackhouse Racing and Chastain's current team. These are drivers who compete in the same manufacturer family, who see each other at the same sponsor events, the same driver meetings, the same pre-race briefings. When things go sideways between drivers in that kind of proximity, it doesn't just affect them. It creates tension that spreads through teams, crew members, and the garage environment as a whole. People pick sides, even quietly. That's the part of NASCAR politics that never makes the broadcast but shapes everything you see on the racetrack. Now let's zoom out and think about what this really means for NASCAR as a sport right now. The league has been working hard to build a culture of authentic personalities and genuine rivalries, because that's what keeps fans engaged. And rivalries like this one, when they're real, when they come from actual friction between real competitors with real stakes, are gold for the sport. But there's a fine line between compelling rivalry and a situation that starts to damage the relationships NASCAR needs to function at a high level. Teams have to cooperate on safety issues. Drivers have to share information in certain situations. When personal animosity goes deep enough, that cooperation can break down in ways that actually hurt everyone. What happens next between these two is genuinely hard to predict, and that's part of what makes it worth watching so closely. They will be on the same racetrack again very soon. Every time they're within 3 car lengths of each other, fans are going to be leaning forward. Every bump, every block, every moment of close racing is going to get filtered through the lens of this confrontation. That's unavoidable now. Chastain made sure of that when he chose those specific words. You don't call a fellow competitor two-faced in public and then expect things to go back to normal the next weekend like nothing happened. There's also the question of whether NASCAR steps in at any point. The sanctioning body has shown recently that it's willing to address interpersonal conflicts between drivers before they escalate into something uglier. If officials sense that this feud has enough heat to cause a genuinely dangerous situation on track, they're going to have conversations in private that we never hear about. But those conversations happen, and they matter. My honest take on all of this is pretty straightforward. Chastain saying what he said publicly took guts, and it also took a certain amount of frustration that had clearly reached a boiling point. You don't use language like that casually. Whatever happened in that post-race conversation between him and Suárez clearly crossed the line for Chastain, and I think it's fair to give him credit for putting it out there honestly rather than pretending everything was fine. At the same time, I'd want to hear Suárez's full version before deciding he deserves that label permanently. NASCAR is a sport of competing perspectives, and the truth usually lives somewhere in the middle of 2 passionate drivers, both convinced they're right. What I do know is this. This feud is far from over. These 2 drivers are going to share the same air for the rest of this season, and potentially for seasons to come. And every single lap they run near each other from here on out is going to carry the weight of this moment. So I want to know what you think. Was Chastain right to call Suárez out publicly like that? Or did he take it too far by going straight to the two-faced label? And who do you think is actually in the right here based on everything you've seen this season? Drop your take in the comments below. This is one of those debates where I genuinely want to hear from you, because the NASCAR community always has the sharpest reads on situations like this. See you in the next one.